Peter Ryan is a fine example of the old maxim that a good rugby coach need not have played international or even provincial rugby. Auckland Rugby's Coach of the Year never played big rugby, but through hard work he came up through the grades as a coach with Auckland's Maris Club to win the 1994 Auckland Senior Grand Final at his first attempt. In this segment, Peter explains what difficulties that rise initially posed for him in being accepted by the team's most senior players. He tells how a willingness to pick the brains of other great players and coaches can help any aspiring coach.
I played a lot of rugby when I was younger. I played first 15 rugby and for Sacred Heart College, and when I came out of college I played senior rugby for 2 or 3 years down in Hamilton and the Waikato and in the King Country and the Manawatu. But you know, I never reached any great heights like provincial rugby or anything like that. You know, senior level was the highest level I got to. It helps in that you understand what the players are going through and you understand what the players are trying to achieve. I think having played the game gives you a big understanding like that. It just makes you feel for the players. It makes you understand the players a lot more, yeah. I haven't introduced a lot of new techniques, but I was an admirer of the Australian back play over the years and getting the ball wide to the outside man, giving them space. And I've used a few techniques of, you know, running them, passing and putting the man out wide in space, and hopefully it's working quite well for the side. Coaching representative football is you're coaching the cream in every position so that you're coaching the very best, and therefore you have no trouble really executing or adopting the things you want to do. When you're coaching club rugby, you're obviously limited in certain positions and the things that you can do. So you've got to really look at your overall situation with the players, and maybe you've got to play players in different positions which they would want to play in simply for the overall strength of the side, you know. So you've got to be prepared to be more adaptable coaching club rugby as opposed to coaching representative rugby. Well, you look at your composition of your team to begin with and you realise where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are, and therefore you try to fit a game plan around it. As I said, coaching rep sides, it's not a big deal because you're pretty strong in every position. Probably here at Maris we're very similar, but you may have to shift players out of familiar positions to get an overall strength, and you tend to try to play to your strengths, you know, and again, you're probably only as strong as your weakest players. So you try to lift the morale and the enthusiasm and the commitment of the weakest players, and you make them all feel very much as part of one team, so that when the team goes out on the paddock, there are no marked weak players in our squad, you know. Psychologically, they're all up there doing their best, all on an even plane, all helping one another, and, you know, no one goes out branded as a weak player or anything like that. We work on lifting that throughout the year, and so that most players, when they hit the track, are pretty confident in what they're going to do.
Keep it on, walk it up, walk it up, walk it up, walk it up, fight!
Possibly at the beginning of last year there was a little bit of reservation on the part of some of the older boys, and that's understandable too, but as the season wore on and we gelled as a team and the young fellas started to make their mark and carry their fair share of the load, they were accepted, and, you know, the team really got on with the job of winning the championship. You know, it's probably a bit like training a racehorse. You've got to understand the players. They're all different. There's 15 different personalities. You've got to learn to their psyche, learn to what makes them tick, what makes them want to do things, what puts them off doing things, and then trying to gel it all together for the important occasions. Yeah. So I've never trained with assistants or coached with assistants in the past. But I find you have to be very careful as to the people that you choose to be assistants. You know, assistant coaches are a special breed of person. They've got to be very understanding individuals. They've got to be compliant. They've got to have a feel for what you're trying to achieve and be an aid and abet that. And as I said, they're a very special sort of people. You can get trapped with assistants that tend to want to do things or take over as the main role and things like that, and therefore it's defeating, they can be possibly defeating the purposes which you're trying to achieve. So, you know, I in the past have tended to favour getting guys along when I want help in specialty situations. I might want people to look at my front rows. I'll get a front row forward like Kevin Boyle or someone like that to come along and give me a hand. If I want guys to help me with my loose forwards, I can get fellas like Zinny Brook or Pat Lamb or someone to give me a hand. And particularly at Marist, you've got so much talent here and so much expertise that it's not hard drawing on everyone's intelligence and experience and that. But Bernie's that special sort of guy. You know, this year I found that last year I probably spread myself too much trying to cover the whole 15. So I asked Bernie to come and give me a hand, and he's really doing a wonderful job with the backs, and he's excellent to work with. And he probably knows more about back play than I do at any rate. I was a back myself in my playing days, and I probably tended to favour back coaching when I first started, but I made a deliberate point in my early coaching days to learn as much as I could about forward play. I did all the coaching schools at Auckland here. I concentrated on getting tutored by the coaching experts like Andy Hayden and Grant Dixon and all those guys, listening to what they had to say, and I really made it my business to make a study of forward play, and I have studied forward play very, very hard over the last 6 to 7 years, 8 years, you know, and therefore it comes back, you know, like you don't always need a lot of experience at actually playing in a particular situation. If you understand the game and you've played the game per se, you know, you can pick up and learn very, very, very well, and I'd like to think I've probably done that with the forwards, you know. It's hard to quantify in percentages, but certainly man management is an important part of coaching. You can have all the expertise and all the technique in the world, but if you can't excite the players or stimulate the players to want to do it, it's not going to work for you. I mean, we should be smarting. I mean, the press virtually wrote us off. They've said that Ponsonby's got the trophy. I mean, it's very easy to write Ponsonby. It's popular. Everyone wants to write them. But it's, you know, but you guys are a better team than that. And you have the ability to do that on Saturday. So we'll go and do it. Okay, thank you, Barton, for your contribution. I've always worked on the principle at coaching of laying the foundation, giving the guys the opportunity, creating the environment for them to want to perform and show their skills and enjoy it and show their class. You know, if you can create that environment in players, their ability and their natural class will do wonders for you. Obviously, then you've got to bring your impression on the game, you've got to bring your style to the game, and you've got to be sure of that within yourself, and therefore you have to know your technique and you have to know your game plans and your strategies. But certainly, as I said earlier on, if the environment is not there for the players to want to perform, all the technique and all the game plans and strategies can amount to nothing. You know, they have to have that environment where they want to enjoy themselves and do well.
Peter Ryan's ability to motivate his team to championship honours is now unquestioned. But for the views of a real specialist in this vital area of a team's preparation, we now turn to sports psychologist Craig Lewis.
A lot of the rugby players take a little bit of time to come to grips with the sort of psychological skills that you're trying to develop. Basically, very few of them have had much of a role to play in their own development. They've tended to rely on the coach to do that, so they haven't really been empowered to make those sort of decisions. And that makes it difficult for them to develop their own skills as an elite player, because really it becomes their responsibility to do that. And I find that a lot of them tend to rely heavily on the coach to set the goals, which is fine, but the problem with that tends to be that, I mean, they achieve those goals, but those goals are not really stretching their limits. And I think it's important that the athlete needs to understand their role in setting the goals. And when they understand that role, the goals that they set tend to be a lot higher and still tend to be attained. So from my experiences, I think at a junior level there needs to be a lot more emphasis placed on empowering young athletes or young rugby players to make those sort of decisions. But I tend to find that the exact opposite occurs, probably more so in rugby, from my experiences, than in most other sports. And I don't really know why that is. Optimal arousal basically revolves around the athlete's perception of challenge and their perception of ability. So if the two marry off, you tend to have an athlete who is optimally aroused and things tend to flow. When an athlete competes under-aroused, it tends to be because they have a high perception of their ability but actually can't read challenge in the situation that they find themselves in. So in that circumstance they go out and tend to play a little bit lethargic. Alternatively, if you have an athlete who perceives an enormous challenge, like a club player going to play representative rugby, then you're likely to have a high perception of challenge and really quite a low perception of ability, and that athlete will compete anxious. So the key really is to get some consistency between your perception of challenge and your perception of ability. And obviously the way to do that is to perceive challenge internally. So the athlete has to see the challenge as being them performing the skills of their game, and that way the two will always marry off. Symptoms of over-arousal, I mean there's quite a lot of things that you would consider to be correlates of stress. The obvious ones are the urge to urinate is an obvious one, sweaty palms, increased heart rate, all those sort of things tend to be more tangible ways of seeing that an athlete's a little bit anxious. Other things are self-doubt, starting to doubt the value of performing, the value of the sport. All those sort of things tend to indicate that the athlete might be a little bit anxious at the time of competition. Under-arousal tends to be more just basic lethargy, no real determination in preparation really, just really a matter of just rolling along and not really recognising the significance of the event. For me, I tend to find athletes who compete under-aroused tend to have done very little forethought about the game itself. So when they go out to compete, they really don't have any structures or any routines to work to. Whereas an athlete who's well prepared tends to have those sort of things, not only in their head, but generally speaking, written out as well. I think the first thing is it's very important for the coach to recognise that his athletes need to be attending to controllable things in their performance. So that's the specifics of how they perform, the skills of the game. Once you've done that, then you should have a consistency across the board for having an athlete who is perceiving challenge. Okay, because the challenge is always from within. When an athlete starts to attend to things that are uncontrollable, then that will tend to create anxiety. So a coach's talk that highlights specifically the excellence of the opponent, the weather conditions, the refereeing, all those sort of things will tend to create an anxiety in an athlete. So the coach's team talk needs to be primarily focused around the things that he wants his players to attend to.
You all know what you've got to do. You all know your roles. You're all smarting from last week. Coming! Head up! Coming! Head up! Let's use it. Let's use that call forwards. Every scrum time we use it. Don't just go in here and forget about it when you get out there, Levy. Patrick, concentrate. Get low.
I think one of the main areas that coaches fall down with their team talk is that they try to provide too much information. I mean, an athlete competing or a person generally will probably be able to attend to about 6 or 7 things at a time. In a stress situation like competitive sport, you're probably looking at about 2 or 3 things. So a coach who goes out there and delivers a talk for about 10 or 15 minutes, highlighting a number of areas, is likely to have his players switch off pretty immediately. So the important thing, I think, in your team talk is to say 2 or 3 things, but just keep reiterating them and reiterating them. And then the players will understand what's required of them. You know, it's specific things like making sure that you're working hard to get to the breakdown, working in pairs, running in pairs, perhaps specific things to do with the line out, Perhaps their halfback, you might be highlighting the need for him to call early. You might be talking to your first five about the need to see the vision, have the vision to see how his backline is set up. Just anything like that, but just highlighting very specific things. In actual fact, a lot of that really should be done or could be done individually with each player, so that when you bring the team together collectively, you talk about 2 or 3 things that the team, as a team, must try and attend to. But a lot of what you want to get through to your players is best done sometime away from game time on an individual basis, so that the player can actually understand what's required of them in that game. The important thing with peaking is to make sure that your athletes are concentrating on their own controllable things. So they're concentrating on the specifics of their performance, the actual skills that they need to display when they play. So the coach should always be trying to highlight those things to his team. I think you've got to accept that in a long season, athletes are going to actually have periods where they're not performing to their optimum. And that's fine. I mean, the important thing in those situations is to be able to address them and allow the athletes to understand why they're not performing the way they want to perform. So quite often you'll find with a team that starts very well will go through a slump mid-season, and that is basically because they no longer can see challenge in what they're doing, and that's because they're looking at the opponent for the challenge. So if you find you're in that situation, it's important to sit down with your athletes and explain to them that the main reason why they are struggling is because they have ceased to see challenge in their own performance and are seeing challenge in the opponents who basically to date have proven not to be quite as good as them. So that's an important thing for coaches to recognise, is that you know it is feasible that teams are going to go through slumps. In fact, it's very unusual for a team not to. The important thing is how you react to that. I think what you should be doing is you should be getting your athletes to actually sit down and write down the things that they want to achieve in each particular game, setting their own goals, the goals that are related to their specific performance, not related to scores and not related to outcomes, but just related to them doing the things that they know are important in their game. I think once you get your athletes onto that sort of a level, you're going to find that consistency will come as a matter of course. So it really is just a matter of getting onto things very early, talking it through and developing strategies or routines that are going to allow you to once again emphasise the controllable nature of their performance. Because once an athlete feels they're in control, then they will start to perform the way they want to perform. I think it's very important that your athletes also recognise that criticism is there so that they can develop. And I think if you don't emphasise that at any point in time early in your season, then it's very easy for your players to be hurt by criticism. But it is important that everybody in the team recognises that the criticism the coach offers and the other team members offer are offered because they want to see the team and the individual develop. I think one of the things that I don't believe coaches generally across the board, not just in rugby but in any sport, are not terribly good at, and that is recognising effort and emotion. If you can recognise effort in your players, regardless of outcome, then you're likely to get the sort of consistency that you want. Too many of us tend to praise result and regardless of performance. So for a team who performs poorly but still wins, we tend to find that coaches will see that as a good performance, whereas in actual fact the performance itself was poor. So you need to be constantly highlighting the effort of the player, and in that way that will make the player more internally focused on their own performance when they go out to perform. I think the most important thing that the coach has to recognise is that the motivation that they're seeking actually comes from the sort of goals that the athlete is going to set. So if the athlete is setting goals on a very short-term basis, like a weekly basis, I mean, with the athletes that I work with, we look to set technical, tactical, physical, mental, environmental or behavioural goals every week. So every week an athlete performing in my regime would be looking towards those sort of things. Now that's your motivation right there, because the athlete can then look at what they've set themselves to do, it's in writing, and go about achieving it. I think that a lot of coaches tend to see their role as being the person responsible for motivation in the team. But in actual fact, the athlete is the one responsible for motivation in the team. The coach's role is to facilitate the opportunity to motivate within the team. So I think the goal setting is an important framework. I think the second thing that the coach must then do is make sure that his training structure fits around the sort of things that his players want to achieve. Now, if the player doesn't want to achieve what the coach believes he should be working towards, then the coach needs to guide their discovery to understand the sort of things that he, as a coach, believes the player needs to be working on. So I think it's very important for the coach to firstly make sure the goal setting is well and truly in place, and secondly, make sure that there is a facility for that goal setting to be realised within the training structure. If you do that, then I think you'll find you'll have a fairly motivated team.
All the skills, fitness and drills work of your team will come to nothing if you can't get your players to play by the rules. Cutting the penalties you concede in a match can win you games, especially the tight ones. Apart from lineouts, your team will concede most penalties in the rucks and mauls. Conversely, rucks and mauls provide the great springboard of New Zealand rugby for attacking opportunities. In this section, rugby law experts Riley Bell and Dave Bishop explain why turnovers take place, the obligations of the team with the ball, and how to turn a maul into a ruck and gain good possession.
We're going to discuss now what constitutes a ruck and a maul. The main points about a ruck are that the ruck only occurs in the field of play, that is between the goal lines, that the ball is on the ground, that the players are in physical contact, and that doesn't mean alongside one another, but they are bound, and they are closing around the ball on the ground. Those are the main key elements of a ruck. The elements of the maul are that it too can only occur in the field of play, that is between the goal lines, that it only occurs when two players from each team are around the ball carrier. So you have three basic members of a maul, two players from each team gathering around the player carrying the ball. Are there any other points there, Dave, that would be helpful?
Well, I think the main thing with the maul, of course, for its formation is that the players must be on their feet.
Right.
That is a crucial point in the formation of the maul, because if they are not on their feet, we don't have a maul by definition, and therefore we have what is called general play.
And while we touch on general play, the thing is that the players need to understand, and coaches need to understand, that general play, if it is not a ruck by definition, and it's not a maul by definition, then it is general play, and that has a big impact on things like offside laws and things like that.
Well, the ruck has always been a very integral part of the game here in New Zealand, and particularly traditionally in the south. But I think we've got to realise that in rucking there are certain obligations by the players in terms of what they can do. And there's a very good definition that's been made available now in relation to rucking and what rucking is, because rucking basically is the act of a player who is in the ruck using his feet to retrieve or retain the ball without contravening Law 26, which is the foul play and dangerous play situations. And we have seen a number of examples in rugby where players inadvertently have used their feet in an ill-advised manner under the pretext of rucking. Now, you know, I think in practical terms, players and coaches should be very aware that for rucking, the players must be rucking for the ball and not players on the ground. It must be for the ball. However, if players are legitimately rucking for the ball, and they must not intentionally step on other players on the ground, and they should only ruck in close proximity to the ball. So in other words, that means that providing the ball is immediately available and is clearly visible for the players and the referee to see, if in the action of rucking, and rucking is a motion of the feet in a backwards motion, not an up and down, it's in a backwards motion, providing that those feet are going for the ball, that is legitimate rucking and shall be considered so, and the game will continue, because it is a very integral part of the game, and it's good play to get dynamic driving play forward. Now, quite often in a ruck, occasionally the ball will become trapped because of players on the ground, and if the referee believes that there is any danger at all to any player on the ground because of the actions of feet, he should be blowing his whistle very, very quickly. And in that case, the scrum feed would be going to the team that was going forward at the commencement of that particular ruck. So it would be the team that is going forward that took the ball in and formed the ruck that will get the scrum feed. There is not a turnover law applicable when the ball is on the ground and a ruck is formed.
Fine. Dave, we discussed earlier on what constitutes a maul and the theory behind it. What are you looking for in the practicalities of a referee in a very dynamic situation?
I think that's the key, that it is a dynamic situation and it's always fluid, so therefore there are always players arriving. And so from that point of view, you've got to ensure that any arriving players actually join a maul alongside or behind the hindmost player in that maul. So that means that no players can come into this and join on the side of a maul. They must always come in and join at the back if they wish to be part of that maul. If they don't want to be part of the maul and they wish to stand off, therefore they've got to stand at the offside line, which is an imaginary line drawn across the hindmost feet of the participants in that particular maul. So we're looking for how players arrive, are they in a legal position to join that maul, and are they properly bound upon that maul.
Good. Now, there are other things that flow from that about turning the maul over. There's a lot of discussion. The crowd loves it, and they try to second-guess the referee which way, who's going to get the subsequent put in at a maul. And it's part of the game, and it's growing in its character, and it's fun of the game. But what are the things that are going through your mind as that maul forms? What are you looking for about who's going to get the maul and how long is it going to last?
Well, under law, of course, as long as a maul is dynamic and is moving in a forward motion, that maul can continue. But at such point that it becomes stationary and the movement of the players is stationary, at that point then, the referee is actually obligated under law to blow his whistle and restart play with a scrummage. Now, the practice in New Zealand is once a maul becomes stationary, that the referee will use the term clear it or use it. Now, normally he will address that at the halfback because he's the communicator to the forwards of that particular team in front of him, and he will give a reasonable period of time, 2 or 3 seconds, for that ball to be emerged from the maul, and it must be played by other players, either the halfback or someone moves off the maul. It cannot be restarted. The maul cannot then restart again. Once that command is given, it is non-negotiable. Another aspect of play must take place. Now, if the ball does not become clear and is not cleared from that time, then the scrum feed in this situation is a turnover. It is the opposition team that will then get the feed. So the obligations in all stages in a maul are clearly with the team in possession. They are the players who have to dictate if they retain possession or they lose possession to the opponents. That's the risk they take in terms of prolonging a maul, because we would rather prefer to see the maul cleared from a maul as quick as possible. The interesting thing, it also applies the turnover law where a maul collapses and the ball becomes unplayable. So we quite often can have a maul that collapses to the ground through various factors. Hopefully not because a player has willfully collapsed the maul, in which case he would be liable for penalty. But quite often mauls do collapse, and in that situation, because you haven't freed the ball, you haven't met your obligations under law to make that ball available to your team, therefore you would lose the scrum feed in that situation too, and once again that would be a turnover and the opposition would get the ball.
Now, there's one other occasion when a maul can become a ruck. What happens then?
Well, there is. There's a good old saying in rugby that players and coaches should be very aware of, that a maul can be turned into a ruck, but a ruck cannot be turned into a maul, i.e. a player at the back of a ruck cannot pick up the ball and then create a maul. He's liable for penalty. Whereas a maul, the ball carrier, one player who is in possession of the ball, can go to ground in a maul and turn that maul into a ruck, because in the action of going to ground he then places the ball on the ground. We still then have players on their feet and in physical contact over that ball. So a maul can turn by definition into a ruck. And I think we're seeing a lot of teams in New Zealand who endeavour to place the ball on the ground and turn it into a ruck. A, to get good possession, and also, of course, to ensure that if the ball does become unplayable, they then get the scrum feed. But the important point to remember in this is the ball must be on the ground. If it is off the ground, it would be dealt with as a collapsed maul, and you would lose it.
David, you mentioned early on about the calling clear it and indicating that the ball should come out of the maul. Quite often you see that maul start to go sideways and things get a bit complicated in there. What are things you're looking for as a referee?
Well, I think quite often there, one of the options players have when you say clear it, of course, is to roll off the maul with the ball in their possession. And I suppose that leads on to this term quite often we hear, the rolling maul, which in fact is a misnomer. It is probably bad use of the English language to some extent, because it is not a maul. What we in fact do have is a group of players, normally of one team, who rolled off the side of a maul, and therefore it is now general play. And that means, of course, that player is liable for tackle, because in the action of rolling off he has broken his binding, and therefore it is general play, therefore he is liable to be tackled. And it also means that the players quite often who are in front of him, if they are in a position that they're obstructing anyone coming in and making a tackle on that ball carrier, then they would be liable for penalty for obstruction. So the rolling maul is a term that players quite often use to move play away from that situation, but in doing so they should be very aware that they are liable for tackle and that any players in front of the ball carrier are liable for penalty under the obstruction provision. So from a referee perspective, that's what I'm really looking for, and we should be looking for in terms of our control of that particular area of the game.
So David, thanks very much for your insights into your management of those phases of the game. I think for all players who are involved at the game at any serious level at all, if we asked and had to stress some things they should understand, I believe it's the definitions of what is a ruck, what is a maul, and understanding the difference when neither of those two things are in effect, you in fact have general play. It has a tremendous impact on how the game is played and affects all sorts of areas of the game. And the greater the understanding of a player, a skillful player, of those things, is greater enjoyment of the game is going to be.
It all sounds so simple, doesn't it? Know the laws and you are 3/4 of the way to developing a successful team. But that other elusive 25% of the success package comes from solid preparation, both physical and mental. As New Zealand Rugby Union's Director of Coaching, Lee Smith, explains, the game plan is vital to achieve a satisfactory outcome each weekend. The plan must be constantly examined and revised week by week.
Now that we've established what the team wants to achieve when playing the game, we can now look at how it is to achieve these. These are the patterns of play. They are divided in the same way into attack and defence, and in the same subdivisions as the game plan, so that there is consistency between the two. It is important to be proactive in developing patterns of play, so that the vision the coach has of where the players are going and how he is going to develop them into better rugby players is incorporated into the plan. The patterns of play determine what is done in the practice field, what drills are used. It is important that the drills are not done for their own sake. Drills are not an end in themselves. They are a means to an end, a means to better performance on the field of play. In addition to the techniques of the game and the tactics of the game, the skills that are used to improve performance will also include fitness, motivation, and personal management techniques that all players need to be successful rugby players. The patterns of play have defined how we are going to achieve our game plan. However, they have to be refined each week to meet the challenge of the next opposing team. This refinement we call tactics. The tactics then are the how for now, and they are based on a list of variables that change from one week to the next. The most obvious of these is the opposing team. However, weather, ground conditions, the score on the scoreboard and the time remaining in the game, the team's position on the competition table, and the time in the season are all factors that will change weekly. It is important that tactics are not a major change from the patterns of play, but merely a change of emphasis in it. Both the tactics and the patterns of play are achieved by putting into place achievement strategies. As with the patterns, these can be rugby specific and sport general. But more importantly, when it comes to tactics, they are rugby specific. The drills that are to be used should directly reflect the patterns and tactics to be used in the game, both technically and in the tactical decision-making aspects of play. Monitoring. To measure the performance of the team, the coach should have in place monitoring methods that enable the performance to be analysed. These may be subjective. To meet this need, the coach may take notes during the game or record into a dictaphone for reference later. These should be backed up, however, by sound statistical data that verify the opinions of the subjective analysis. Accountability. Accountability is based on a comparison between the results of the monitoring of the team's performance and what they intended doing as spelled out in their game plan and patterns of play. By comparing the two, the coach can decide to modify, fine-tune, or change completely the game plan. Initially, he may look at selections, but it is this final step of accountability that fine-tunes performance and enables the team to progress throughout the season.
As Lee stresses, you can't afford to sit on your laurels after victory. Fine-tuning the plan will keep players stimulated and at the top of their potential. Reaching true potential is what physiotherapist Malcolm Hood has been achieving for players for many years, from club through to international level. In this section, he talks about one of rugby's most frequently seen problems, the injured shoulder.
The shoulder joint is like a tennis ball in a saucer. It's built for mobility, it's not built for strength. Feel like? Yeah. The shoulder joint moves 180 degrees to the front, giving a tremendous range of motion. Moves 180 degrees to the side, giving a tremendous range of motion again. It also moves outward and it moves up the back as well. The beauty of the shoulder joint is that it's involved with almost everything in the game of rugby football. It's involved in the tackle, in scrummaging, in the line-out throw, jumping in the line-out, catching the ball, passing the ball. There is virtually no action on the rugby field where you don't use the shoulder joint. It is designed to be moved, it's not designed to be strong. And unfortunately, a lot of our people, when they're training, train for it to be strong, not to design it, the training session, for mobility. So most of the emphasis today will be on the mobility of the shoulder joint. And when you think about it, one of the very few joints in the body that dislocates often is the shoulder joint. Most other joints do not dislocate. This is because of mobility and training often in the wrong direction. What we're talking about with the shoulder joint is training basically in the position that we call the stance of champions. Work in that position and arms well back. What too many coaches tend to do is concentrate on the press up and on the bench press, which in fact brings us into the fetal position, which is the position that is not particularly good for rugby. And it also diminishes the opportunity for the open lung, and the person's respiratory capacity diminishes. There are four main exercises that we use for mobility. We call them toothbrushing exercises because they should be done on a very regular basis, probably 5 or 6 times a week. And we like to start these very young in the young children of approximately 8 or 9 for the education purposes, and of course leading right through one's rugby career. Indeed, one shouldn't really stop these exercises even when one finishes rugby. So what are the 4 main exercises? The first one is where you take your wrist and pull the arm right across the body behind the head. The tendency is to let the arm come forward, which defeats the purpose. We want it back there. And in all these exercises, we should do it 2 or 3 times and holding each one for approximately 5 to 15 seconds, depending on how tight the actual muscle feels. Thanks, Clinton. And again on the other shoulder. And quietly behind. Good, excellent. When you're happy. The second exercise that we would do is pulling the arm across in front of the body, hand in behind the elbow, keep the arm well down, keep it well down, and stretch both on that angle, elevating on that angle, and taking it very high now. And again on that angle. This brings in all the muscle fibre around the shoulders, not just the one lot in one straight line. A more difficult exercise, but one that is still a critical exercise, is the shoulder dip. And it's down into a position, take up all the stretch, come to one side, Clinton, that's it, and gently easing in to stretching the shoulder. And then changing over to the other one. Not too much bounce there, Clinton, just a little bit of an edging in, that's it. And the beauty of this exercise is it can be developed into a strength exercise by just coming up and going down and coming up, and it can be made into a strength exercise, again developing the muscles to the back of the shoulder rather than those to the front. The 4th stretch exercise is in a kneeling position, head goes down, and try and put it under the armpit, again holding for around about 6 to 15 seconds, depending on how it feels, and the other side, stretching all these muscles around the back of the shoulder. It can be varied by arm placement, by putting the arms closer together and further apart, ensuring that all the fibre of the shoulders is stretched. While mobility is the most important facet to a shoulder, we also must not neglect the strength factors. The very important thing about any strength work with the shoulder, however, is to work in the extremes of range, the same places that our arm goes when we're playing rugby football. Again, we like to concentrate on the muscles that are around the back rather than the ones around the front. And the following 3 exercises are those that emphasise that point. The first exercise that we start on is with a small dumbbell, and you increase in your dumbbells as you get older and stronger, and we work into rotation laterally, making sure that the arm goes well back and then bringing it back forward. We prefer to work one arm at a time rather than 2 arms together, as 2 arms together tends to tighten up the little muscles of the spine which also link into the shoulder, whereas 1 arm movements tend to keep those muscles and joints free. Another exercise for developing on that as well is to bring the arm into that position with the elbow hanging at right angles, straighten the elbow, take the arm back and back down again. Straightening the elbow and arm right back and back down. And we can increase the loading by taking it up into that position, same exercise again, and arm back and back down. This exercise should be performed to the count of 6. Continuing on with our development of the muscles that put us into the stance of champions is the pull down overhead. Clinton, if you just take hold of the bar and just pull down quietly in your own time, again to the count of 6 and back up. And this develops the big muscles that come down from the neck into the shoulder and also that support the shoulders in this position. One does this to just on fatigue plus 5. It's the 5 one does when one is tired that actually develop the muscle strength. Strapping the shoulder joint itself is not particularly efficient. And if it's going to be strapped at all, it really needs to be done by the physiotherapist, as most of the strapping techniques are very complicated. However, what we can do is strap the collarbone, or the AC joint. That is the area that is in the centre of our cross. It sits just to one side of the actual shoulder joint itself, and we follow those lines using 1-inch zinc oxide or sports tape. We follow the collarbone. Making several strips over that area, just following through until the patient feels as though the arm is very supported. How's that feeling? Good. Tight enough? Yep. Good. Taping the AC joint in no way impedes mobility of the shoulder. Now with this, Clinton, just keep me informed as to if I'm applying the pressure that feels comfortable for you, because after all, at the end of the day, you're the person that's going out there to perform. You're the soldier in all of this, and I'd like it to be as comfortable as possible. And we can continue to reinforce as per need. The rules of rugby football quite clearly state no one is to wear a shoulder pad in rugby unless one uses padding that is either sewn into the jersey or otherwise taped onto the shoulder directly. And even then, the referee has the right to refuse. Using some polystyrene foam, preferably something that is mouldable in all directions, taking the pad, splitting it down the centre, make a large keyhole, which fits over the lumpy bit that was outlined earlier. Splitting the pad, in this case we'll need to trim. One splits the pad forwards and backwards. So when the force comes down on the collarbone, it is distributing the weight everywhere but over the painful area. Clinton, could you just hold that down there with the other hand a moment? Thank you. Excellent. Thank you. And one can continue to reinforce just as you want to on that. A pad like this in no way acts as a weapon. That's quite safe, both for the tackler and the person doing the tackling. Sprained collarbones are particularly painful, but there's not a lot of damage to them. For that reason, we can protect the patient from a lot of pain by padding. It's an injury that does very, very well with a pad over it to just act as a shock absorber, preferably not for trainings, but just for the game. The person should be still rehabilitating at their training.
The New Zealand Rugby Referees Association have produced 2 new videos on positional refereeing. Positional refereeing is a skill that all referees should develop. In this section, we demonstrate how a referee must be able to adapt to the situation at second phase play and scrum time. From a coach's perspective, you will find this very interesting viewing.
Preston inside his 22. Or charged by Keeley. Picked up by the captain, Sexton. 8 metres short of the line, Canterbury have a chance. Stu Lowe drives on. To the line they go. Referee says...
Positional refereeing of the ruck and maul requires the referee to be able to be flexible in their positions that they take up for these 2 phases of the game. Every ruck and maul situation that occurs during the game will be different from the others that occur. Therefore, the referee must consider the best options open to them, to be able to get into a position that enables them to see as much as possible. Positional refereeing will differ slightly from referee to referee, but the basics will all be the same. Correct positioning of the referee at second phase play will enhance the game image and add to the continuity that can be obtained by a referee that is in the correct position to rule on infringements that stifle the game and be able to communicate with players effectively. This video has been produced to educate referees on the basics of positional refereeing at the ruck and maul. It will demonstrate the various positions that referees are able to take up. This video should be used as a training guide on teaching referees the art of positional refereeing. The coach may have to make minor adjustments to meet the referee's needs. Arriving at the ruck maul. The angle you approach each ruck maul in a game will vary greatly. But whatever the angle you'll be adopting, it is necessary that you position yourself to be able to see the ball and the formation of the ruck maul. The coloured area is what the referee would be seeing from this position, taking in the formation of the ruck and the players in close proximity. The referee has moved to a position where he has the best view of the ball and is away from the player zone of the players joining the ruck. The coloured area is what the referee is seeing from this position, the delivery of the ball and the players on the ground. At this stage of the ruck, you must have good vision of the ball. The referee has now moved around to the other side of the ruck for better vision and control of the players involved around the ball delivery area. As the ball starts to emerge, it is necessary to set the offside lines for the non-participants indicated by the solid yellow line on both sides of the ruck. The coloured area is what the referee would be seeing from this position. He has kept away from the ruck for better overall vision, including the players alongside the ruck. As the ball is emerging, he has communicated to the non-participants of the opposing team to keep them onside by indicating with the arm. The coloured area is the vision the referee would have from this position, taking in all the players in the ruck. The referee position is on a slight angle for better vision of the ball and control of the back lines. Key points: position yourself to see the ball. Be away from the player zone. See the delivery of the ball. Set offside lines. Keep well away from the ruck. Keep players onside. Here's the ruck again. Key points: position yourself to see the ball. Be away from the player zone. Keep well away from the ruck. Set offside lines. Keep players onside. See the delivery of the ball. The maul. This frame shows a maul close to the touchline. The referee has decided to adopt the inside position. By taking up this position, it is necessary that you are able to determine which side has the ball and you are able to see the ball at all times. The coloured area is the vision the referee has from this position. Taking in the maul, plus the ball and arriving players, the referee must have full control of the maul at all times from this position. By taking up this side-on stance for the inside position, it is very easy to control the opposing team back lines by using communication, eye contact plus body language, waving back with the arm, etc. The coloured area is what the referee's vision would be of the opposing team back line. It is just a turn of the head to get this vision when taking up this position. Note the very effective preventative refereeing that the referee has achieved by the position of the opposing team backline. It is necessary that your vision and timing of when the ball is cleared from the maul and when the opposing team backline can advance is accurate. Once the ball is cleared from the maul, the referee has turned with the ball delivery, so he has vision of the ball to the awaiting players, indicated by the coloured strip from the referee to the player receiving the ball. Key points: see which team has the ball, have full control of the maul, have eye contact with the players. See which team has the ball, have full control of the maul, have eye contact with the players. The positioning refereeing of the scrummage starts from the time that you signal and make the mark for the scrum. Your position at the engagement process must be close enough so that you are able to manage the engagement of the front rows. The position that you take up may have to be on either side of the player putting the ball in to get a good view of the feed and the hooking process. Once the ball is hooked, you should be in a position to move back with the ball and be able to view the clearance of the ball from the scrummage. When you take a position at the scrummage, it requires you to be able to see all the players in the scrummage, the binding of the players, and to establish offside lines for the non-participants. In this frame, the yellow solid line indicates the offside line for the non-participants. Once the ball is hooked, it is recommended that the referee moves back with the ball. The referee is now in good position to see the ball emerge, but also has good vision of the non-participating players, plus all the scrummage shown by the coloured area. In using this position, don't get too close to the scrummage. In this midfield scrummage, the coloured area is the area in which the referee should be concentrating on at this stage, taking in the opposing team's scrummage plus their back line. Note, the referee's position is well away from the scrummage, but still close enough to control the players in the scrum. The yellow dotted line is the movement line that the referee is going to adopt from this scrummage. From this position, the referee has moved in behind the scrummage to give himself a good vision of the whole scrummage plus the non-participating players. He has good eye contact with the opposing back line and is in good position for good management techniques to keep players onside. He also has very good sighting of the ball.
The Canterbury Rugby Union was the winner of our lucky draw for subscribers to the rugby workshops. Stana Wilson, who works for the union and put the entry in, was delighted to accept the prize of air tickets and accommodation for two to the Auckland Bledisloe Cup test. Congratulations, Stana. We hope you enjoyed the game.